Thank you all for hanging in and waiting till I was back. Not sure what went wrong, but problem is fixed now. I hope you're all doing well, that things are easing up a little bit for where you are. Maybe less restrictions on where to go, when to go, meeting people. It would be good if we could start socializing a little bit more without having to keep so much distancing and go back to human nature. So this will be the 6th and for now the last session on how to work with fear. The next couple of weeks, Sekon Rinpoche is teaching at Institute Lama Tsongkhapa, and these are teachings on emptiness, which I would like to follow. And also I have the feeling that maybe we can close off talking about fear, and I will think about maybe talking about other things in the future. So we have spent some time understanding what fear is, and we defined it as fear being an unpleasant feeling that arises when we experience a danger or a threat to our existence, or maybe to our belongings, something that we feel that is ours. So we have seen the difference between the fear that is experienced by animals and the fear that we as human beings experience. Animals react to immediate danger, and human beings, they also react to immediate danger, but then on top of that, we react to perceived threats. For instance, when we hear that we are in danger, or when we think that we are in danger, when somebody tells us you are in danger. And that is because we have a conceptual mind that creates stories that can that might not be in accordance with reality, or that might be in accordance with reality. But what happens is we can keep creating these stories. And so when the story in itself causes fear to arise, when we repeat the story in our mind, more fear arises and more fear arises. So once that fear arises in the mind, our reasoning consciousness leaves. It's not there anymore. And so the first thing that we need to do when fear arises in the mind is we need to do some fact checking. Is this really true, what I hear? Right? Is it really a danger for me? Is it really a danger for others? And how big is that danger? And then having such a danger, what is the danger compared to other dangers that there are in life, right? Because life is full of dangers. True? When we step in our car and we drive to our work, there is the danger of getting hit by another car and getting killed. But we never think, no, I'm not going to go to work anymore because there is a danger that I might die on my way. We don't do that. So we have to check how big is the danger. And start off, because what happens when the fear arises in the mind, when the fear gets triggered and our own rational thinking stops working, we somehow start believing what the other person is telling us or what we hear on the news. Right? And it might not necessarily be true, or it might not necessarily be true for us. So this is one thing that we need to do in order to counteract our fear. And so then we talked about how independence on the feeling of fear that arises in the mind, our fight and flight response gets triggered. This is what we also call the stress response. So this reaction is extremely useful during real or immediate threats to our life. We need that fear in order to bring ourselves to danger. And when we react from that fear, sometimes you can feel you suddenly can run very fast or you can jump very high just because the fear gives us that adrenaline that makes that possible. When that fear gets triggered over a long period of time, it is going to be detrimental for our state of mind and for our physical well-being. We all know that when we experience a lot of stress, the physical body starts to suffer. We get high blood pressure, we get problems with our heart, maybe we get problems with our weight, we get mental problems, we might get depressed, we might experience anxiety, because there is a perceived threat for a long period of time. And our stress response is not made for that. Our stress response is made for immediate dangers. So we have to take care of ourselves when fear stays in the mind for a long time, so that we minimize the detrimental effects that fear has on our physical and mental well-being. So after that, we looked into what conditions contribute to the fear. And we mainly looked into our own mind, recognizing that our attachment and our aversion contribute to the situation, in the sense that they can make the situation worse. Attachment is that what craves for pleasure, craves for more of what we think brings us pleasure, or it craves for fulfilling our needs, while aversion tries to get away from unpleasant experiences by either distracting ourselves or by suppressing the experience, or by trying to make the experience go away by becoming angry. Right? So when we react with attachment and aversion, when we are concerned with our immediate situation. It is an emotional reaction. It is actually based on that fight and flight reaction. And it is not based on reasoning. If you ever have been in a stressful situation, a real immediate threat, a car comes and suddenly you jump, and you jump before you think. Have you ever had that? And then after the jump, you think, oh my God, what did I do? How did that happen? I didn't even have the thought to jump, and my body just jumped, right? So our stress response, our attachment and aversion arises before we think with logic. So it is an emotional reaction. It is focused on the immediate situation, and it is focused on the short term for ourselves. It is bringing ourselves in danger, or those that might be very close to us, like a mother who grabs her child just on time, moving away from a car that is coming. So then we spoke about the 8 worldly concerns, that attachment and aversion come about due to holding on to the 8 worldly concerns, wanting to experience comfort and wanting to move away from discomfort. By understanding that, if you get insight in how the mind works, how quickly you react with attachment and aversion, it gives you some insight in how unrealistic that mind is, and how it actually perceives things opposite to how reality works. And so even if it feels good to follow that, it somehow brings the opposite effect of what it is promising us. So to really think about that again and again, and to trying to observe that in your own mind, that will help you to get a better understanding of that mechanism, and to also see the faults of that mechanism. And that can help you then not to follow that blind, but to apply some reason when it surfaces in the mind. Okay. If there are any questions during the session, please feel free to put them in the chat box. Or if there is something not clear and you want to have some more clarity around a certain topic, please let me know. So after that, having seen our own mind, how we react with attachment and aversion in order to find comfort and moving away from discomfort, we spoke about the antidotes that we can apply to the disturbing emotions. First, we spoke about the antidotes that we can apply to all the disturbing emotions that we can apply in general. And for instance, we talked about bringing the mind back to the present moment, practicing mindfulness, accepting whatever arises in the mind without judgment, and then contemplating the nature of the mind. And the meditations that we did on Tuesday, and on coming Tuesday we have another one, they were, I think, almost all of them were all on the nature of the mind, how we can look into the nature of the mind in order to move away from identifying with our attachment and our aversion. Then with the antidotes, we also looked into how we can support ourselves in experiencing unpleasant feelings. We all have the tendency to run away from unpleasant feelings. We don't like them, we do not want to be with them, and so we prefer to do something nice. So being with yourself when you experience something unpleasant, whether that is fear or sadness or distraught or any kind of emotion that arises that makes you upset, that you find unpleasant, maybe there's a pain that arises in your mind. If we find a way to be with that experience, a lot of benefit can come from that. I think the first benefit is that if we can sit with that, the attachment that normally arises in dependence upon experiencing unpleasant feelings becomes less strong. And then on top of that, if we can connect with, if we have the courage to really experience unpleasantness, by doing that, we get a lot of insight into the nature of reality. We get a lot of wisdom. We get a lot of knowledge about life. Right? So we did that we called that practicing self-compassion. And in order to practice self-compassion, there were 3 components very important. The first one is that we are mindful of what we are experiencing. And the second was that we have kind self-talk. Right? That we are kind to ourselves while we go through the suffering. And the third was that we remember that we are not alone in this experience. That whatever you experience is something that is experienced by many people. It is part of our human experience, part of humanity. So by remembering that you're not alone in that experience, you somehow reconnect with others, and that helps to let go of the pain much easier. And then after that, we spoke about the specific antidotes that we can apply. The specific antidotes to attachment, which is mainly remembering impermanence and death. Remembering that whatever pleasure we have, it's not going to last. Even our body, our life is not going to last. So then what is the need for holding on to it? And the main antidotes to aversion or anger was that we practice patience and loving kindness. Remember? And then last time we spoke about fear and karma. What are the actions that we have done in the past that caused this situation to arise? And so in general, we can say that harmful actions lead to the experience of unpleasant feelings in the future, while beneficial actions lead to pleasure in the future. When we do good, good will come back to us. When we do bad, negative experiences will come back to us. So we spoke about how karma can ripen, and there are 4 ripening effects of karma. The first one is the fruitional effect, which is our existence. So for us, it's our human existence. That is a fruitional effect of karma. The second is an effect similar to the cause in experience. So for instance, if I have done a very generous gift to somebody, that is the cause for receiving resources in the future. If I hurt somebody deeply, that is the cause for that similar hurt to come back to me in the future. The effect similar to the cause. The third way karma ripens is the effect similar to the cause in action, which means that I repeat the similar action again and again and again. When I, for instance, have trouble paying my bill, and I think, if I cheat a little bit, I will be able to pay for it. And it works, and you don't get caught. That means you feel your cheating is actually gratified. So next time when you're in a similar situation, it's much easier to cheat again and to cheat again. And so then slowly you develop a habit of cheating when you are in a difficult situation. So at this stage, this is the worst ripening effect, because due to that, we keep engaging in negative actions again and again and again. And the fourth way that karma can ripen is the environmental effect. Whatever we experience in the environment, is a karmic effect. And what we're experiencing at the moment in the world, it is very much an environmental effect that we share with so many others. It is like a collective karma. And so you can experience in your environment that, people are getting sick. You witness all kinds of suffering due to the situation, while you yourself do not have any personal experience of this suffering. Right? So you do not have an effect similar to the cause in experience or in action, but you have a lot of environmental effect. When we see other sentient beings suffer, we also suffer. We can feel it. Right? That feeling that we have when we see others suffer, that is the environmental, that's part of the environmental effect. So the amount of fear that we experience is related to the fear that we have instilled on others when we harm them. And so regarding harming, we spoke about direct karma that we create when we engage in actions of harming others, with our own body or with our own speech. But we also spoke about indirect karma that we create when we contribute to the suffering of others, right? And that we can think about the harm that is done to, for instance, the animals. Karma that we have once created will be experienced someday in the future, unless we purify it. So in Buddhism, we purify negative karma that we created with what we call the 4 opponent powers. So karma, what we say is when I engage in a negative action or in a positive action, that leaves a seed in my mind that in the future will ripen to a similar experience. That seed has a certain potency. And the potency of the seed depends upon many factors. For instance, my intention with which I had when I engage in the action, but also how much pleasure I experience from the action. And so that potential of the seed, we can purify that potential. And so when we engage in practices that use the 4 opponent powers, we lessen the potential of the seed. And the seed becomes weaker and weaker and weaker until we have purified completely. And then they say you will experience one little experience in order to totally eliminate that seed. So what were the 4 opponent powers? I think I talked about 3 last week, so today I'll give you the 4th one as well. So the first one was the power of refuge and bodhicitta. So the power of taking refuge and generating bodhicitta is done because most of the negative karma that we create, or maybe I should say all of the negative karma that we create, is created in relationship to the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, or sentient beings. Right? So if we want to create karma, if we want to purify the karma that we did in relationship to sentient beings, and we generate a mind that wants to benefit all sentient beings, then whatever negative karma that we created to some sentient beings gets purified, right? All that karma gets purified in one go. The second power is the power of regret. So we need to, let me add something to the power of refuge. So what we purify with the power of refuge and bodhicitta is our environmental karma. Right? So the karma that we experience mainly at the moment. So we have to think about that. What does it mean, refuge? What does it mean, bodhicitta? How do we do that? Right? And I won't go into that today, but that could be something to be done in the future. The second purifying power is the power of regret. And so we strongly regret the negative actions that we have done. And we do regret that because we have the knowledge that if we do not regret it, one day that karma will come back to us. We will suffer from that, right? So in the West, we regret and we go to the other person and we apologize. We regret because our relationship is disturbed. We regret because we harmed others, but we don't think so much about ourselves, the consequences for ourselves. So when we apologize to the other person, we think, oh, that's it, all finished. But karma has not yet finished because you planted a seed in your mind that has the potency to experience something similar in the past. And once that experience comes to you and you have experienced a lot of suffering and dependence on that, you will not be able to keep practicing Dharma. You'll not be able to keep developing your mind as you would like it. It becomes an obstacle on your path. So that is what we regret. I created causes that are going to be obstacles on my path. I created causes that are going to make me go slower in developing my own potential for wisdom and compassion. I have regret because I cause the sufferings for me. Oh my gosh, it's not just stupid, but it is like, I'm going to suffer from this. Once I can really see that, I can generate strong regret. And that regret will purify the results similar to the cause in experience. So a similar experience will not come back to us. The third opponent power is the power of resolve, which means that we make a strong determination not to engage in such action again. So that purifies the result similar to the cause in action, which refers to the habit, right? If we can see that having certain habits is actually creating a lot of suffering for ourselves, we can say, I do not want to do this anymore. Sometimes we begin with, I don't want to do it for 5 minutes anymore. Sometimes we say for 10 minutes, sometimes for a whole day. You have to see how long you could abstain from creating that action. And that period of time you use for your resolution. Don't make it too long, because then it might be that you fail and then you have to start all over again. Make sure that you're going to be successful in your purification and in your resolution. And the fourth karma, which I didn't talk about last time, is the fourth opponent power is the power of remedy. And the power of remedy is connected to the fruitional karma, to our future rebirth. So I didn't mention that because I thought we already have this body, so we're not gonna, with the situation that is in the world, if we want to do anything about that, we're not purify, we're not going to purify this rebirth because we already have it. But of course, we created lots of seeds for not such a good rebirth. And these we can purify with the power of remedy. And that refers to, for instance, reciting certain mantras, reciting sutras, engaging in good actions. Right? And so the more you do these actions, the less power the seeds have in your mind that have the capacity to throw you in another rebirth. Okay, so these are the 4 opponent powers. So what are we going to look at today? We're going to look at, so who is creating this negative karma or this positive karma? Let's stick with it. We also create positive karma, but with the situation, maybe we stick with the negative one because we want to be free of suffering, right? So who is that I who is creating negative karma? So we're going to look into the I, or what we call the self-grasping mind. The mind that holds on to, well, I did that, or no, I never did that, or I would like to do this. Who is that I? So in Buddhism, that I that we grasp at is the cause of all our suffering. Independence upon that I that arises in the mind, attachment for pleasure arises, and aversion for unpleasant experiences arises. And then in dependence on attachment and aversion, all the other illusions arise. All the conceptualizations that we have in our mind all arise in dependence on the I that we feel is living somewhere inside us, right? That is the self-grasping mind. So how does that self-grasping mind appear to us? How does the I appear to us? It appears as an autonomous, independent entity, right? When we look into the mirror, we see a person, one entity, one body. And I almost have a feeling that I, that I see in the mirror, is going to determine what I'm going to do with the day. That I determines which makes up, the I makes up my mind, decides where I'm going to go, decides what I'm going to do. Maybe it appears as the one who is in charge of my body and mind. You know, I look in the mirror and I see me, but somehow it appears like, well, I'm in charge of this body and I'm in charge of my mind, right? Sometimes the I appears as being the same thing as the body and mind. Sometimes it appears as being something different than the body and the mind. For instance, if I talk about my body and my mind, then there is a third entity, which is the I, who is the owner of my body and my mind. True? Please tell me if I go too fast. You know, this is brain crunching material, and sometimes, you know, we have to hear this again and again and again in order for it to make sense. And so I know that sometimes this can go fast. If you haven't heard about this before, it can go really fast. What I want you to recognize is that when you're in front of the mirror, you recognize one person, right? One body, one entity. And that entity appears to be independent, as if it can make up its own mind, as if it can make its own decisions, not dependent upon anything. That is how it appears to us. And if we look into everything else that exists, whether it's persons, whether it's objects, that all appears in a similar way, as if there is some independent, autonomous entity present in each and every person, in each and every object, existing in and of itself. Right? So we first need to recognize that. And then Buddhism says that entity, what we perceive to exist, doesn't exist at all. And Buddhism says actually things exist in the totally opposite way as they appear to us. They appear to us as being something independent, autonomous, not dependent upon anything, while in actuality, whatever exists, whether it's persons or something, is dependent upon many, many causes and conditions, many, our own mind, on many factors. Something that doesn't depend on something else in Buddhism doesn't exist at all. So then we say, if that I, how we perceive it, doesn't exist at all, what we realize is the lack of such an I. We don't have such an independent I. And when we realize that, when we really can see that on the basis of logic, we call that we realize emptiness. So we first need to see, what do I think the I, how do I think the I exists? And then we have to analyze, does that I exist like that? No, that I is not present. And then after that we can say, then how does the I exist? Right, so we have to make these 3 steps. What is it that I believe exists? Why doesn't it exist? And if that doesn't exist, then how does it exist? Right? So Buddhism doesn't say that I doesn't exist, therefore I doesn't exist. No, Buddhism says the I doesn't exist the way it appears to you. But the I does exist. Right? But not at all in the way it appears to you. Actually in the opposite way. So let's go back to the mirror. Right? We just looked at the image of ourselves in the mirror, and there we saw one body, one person, one entity standing in and of itself. So now look at that same image. And then look at all the cells in your body. Trillions of cells. And then on top of that, there are a lot of living creatures, bacteria, viruses, living in your body amongst these trillions of cells. Right? These are the parts of what makes up our body. These cells, these bacteria, these viruses, they are constantly moving, renewing and dying in every moment. In dependence on these trillions of cells and these bacteria and these viruses, we create an image of our mind, in our mind, which is not existing out of trillions of cells. We see one person, one entity, which doesn't appear as changing moment to moment, but appears quite permanent, right? The one who was staring at you yesterday in the mirror is the same person who's staring at you today. We don't think I'm a different person. We think I'm the same person. I'm the same person as I was 10 years ago. I'm the same person as when I was a child. Yes, I have changed, but I'm the same person, right? There is a sense of permanence that we perceive from ourselves. So we perceive one entity which is permanent, and which is independent of all these cells that make up our body. So that image that we create of the self, we project that onto that collection of all these trillions of cells. And then what happens is the next moment, it is like that collection of cells, that image that we projected onto that, of who we think we are, that somehow reflects back to us. And then we think that that image that we perceive coming back to us, which was our own image that we projected onto us, it appears it's coming from the side of the object. It's coming from our body and mind. It's coming from the image that we perceive in the mirror. Right? So there is a whole collection of parts, a whole collection of cells. And dependent on that, we create an image in the mind of a single entity, which is permanent and which is independent. And we project that onto what we see. And in the next moment, that image reflects back to us, and we see that and we think, oh, that's who I am, that's me. But it comes from our mind, right? If we analyze the object, if we analyze our own body and mind, that one entity, that single entity, which is quite permanent and independent, we will not be able to find that. We say that it doesn't exist from the side of the object. It is a projection of our mind. Can you see that? It is a projection of a mind, and then we believe that that projection exists in reality. While in reality, such entity doesn't exist at all. It's only existing from our mind. And so the stronger we believe that that entity is really living inside us, the stronger we hold on to that. That self is the creator of a negative karma. That self is the creator of a positive karma. The stronger we hold on to that, the more negative karma we create in dependence on that. Because when there is a strong I, there is also, when we strongly hold on to that belief that I am this, the stronger attachment and aversion is that arises in dependence on that. And it is attachment and aversion that makes that we engage in negative actions. Right? Attachment and aversion doesn't engage in positive actions. They might appear positive or they might appear as not harmful. But they're not virtuous actions in the sense that they are going to bring a lot of benefit, because attachment and aversion are delusions. These are disturbing emotions that are not in accordance with reality. All right. So when we have this feeling of the I appearing, especially when we are strongly emotional, the I appears very strong. It appears to exist in a certain way. But when we analyze, it doesn't exist like that. It appears to be an autonomous, unitary, independent entity, but in actuality it doesn't exist like that. It appears to be as something existing inherently in us. This is who we really are. That's who I really am, right? We believe inherently there is an I, an inherently existent I, meaning that is what defines us. But if we would start looking for that I, that independent, unitary entity that we feel we are, if we start searching in our body, if we start searching in our mind, if we start searching outside our body and our mind, we cannot find that single entity. True? The surgeons who cut open our body when they operate, right? They have found many, many, many things in the body, but they never found something that is said, oh, here is the I. Here is the personality of the person, right? Never ever has anything been found like that. So the I does not exist in the body. That I that sometimes feels quite substantially existent, like there is some kind of substance in our heart or sometimes in the stomach that feels really like a ball, this is who I am. When we cut open the body, we cannot find something like that. And if we start investigating the mind and say, well, then which part of the mind is it? Then it's very difficult to pinpoint any part of the mind and saying that is the I. Because sometimes we totally identify with our disturbing emotions. Sometimes we identify with our loving kindness and compassion. Sometimes we identify with the witness, the observer of our experiences. We cannot point to one thing and say, that is the I. It changes. And so the fact that we cannot find that I in the body and in the mind, or even outside of the body and the mind, means that the I does not exist inherently. Inherent existence or true existence means you will be able to find it. Right? But the I cannot be found. And we can apply this to everything. So we can apply that to things like your car, right? If you wonder like which part of that thing outside there is the car, and you start analyzing that object outside that you call the car, you will not find any part that is the car. And then you can say, oh, but the whole collection that makes the car. But if the collection of the parts would be the car, then I would be able to demolish your car and put all the parts on top of each other and say, there is your car. And you would say, no, that's not my car. Or maybe you would beat me up. Or the collection of the parts is not the same thing as the car. There is a car, and we call that a car. There is an object with many parts, and we call that a car. So when we see that object that exists of all these parts, what happens in the mind organizes that object into one object and gives it a name, and then projects that image onto the object that is outside. And in the next moment, that image that we project onto that object reflects back to us. And then it appears somehow that that image is coming from that object, as if that image is coming from the side of the object. even the name that we give it, it is as if it is coming from the side of the object. And we forget that actually that was coming from our own mind. So if the I doesn't exist inherently, what we do in Buddhism normally, in order to realize the lack of inherent existence, we apply reasoning. We apply logic, because the emptiness of things, the lack of inherent existence, we cannot perceive that with our senses. We cannot perceive that with our eye. We cannot perceive that in any other way. For us, at the moment, it is a hidden phenomena, which means it is not accessible directly with a direct perception. So in order to access a hidden phenomena, we first need to apply reasoning. And then due to that application of reasoning, at a certain point, that object can become, we can start to realize that directly. And at that moment, it's not a hidden object for us anymore. It becomes manifest. But at that moment, our ignorance is so thick, it's impossible to see that directly. So I'll give you a few of the reasonings that we do in Buddhism, that can help you to reflect on why the I does not exist inherently. All right, are you ready for that? So if the I were to exist inherently, then it would either have to be exactly the same as the body and the mind, or it would have to be something different as the body and the mind. Inherent existence means existing independently, right? If I say this is my I, then that I needs to be something totally the same as my body and my mind, or it needs to be something very different from my body and my mind. True? And so once you can see that if something would exist inherently, it has to be either the same or it has to be something different from the body and the mind, then we start analyzing. Well, if the I were inherently the same as the body and the mind, what would that mean? Well, I talk about body and mind, so if the self would be the same as body and mind, there would be at least two selves, because I have a body and a mind. Or I could also say, if there is one self, then my body and my mind are the same thing. Right? There's only one body and mind and one self. And you might think that body and mind is the same thing, but the fact that we talk about we use two different words, means that we are referring to two different things. Right? If the body and the mind were the same thing, there is no need to use two different words. So by thinking like that, you can say, okay, so they cannot be the same thing. We could also say if the self would be inherently the same as the body and the mind. The body is substantially existence, right? There is a substance here. If the self would be the same, I should be able to find a substance which I can call the self. And we already talked about that such a self has never been found. We can also say, if the self that I believe exists really exists the way I perceive it, then that would mean that me holding on to the self is a correct consciousness, is not a wrong consciousness. which also means that all the attachment and aversion that that arises in dependence upon that self is correct, which means that all my suffering that I experience is just how it is. You know, if you really feel that, then there is nothing you can do about your situation. No need to apply any antidotes, any mind training, any reflection, nothing. Because what you hold on to, what is actually the cause of all your problems, you believe that's how it is. I see it exactly as it is. So in Buddhism, we say that I that we hold on to is a wrong consciousness, which means that we can generate a mind which directly opposes that wrong consciousness. And when we realize that mind that directly opposes the way we believe that I exists, that belief in the I drops. That cannot, we can see, oh, that's not true. That I hold on to, not there at all. That I believe to exist doesn't exist at all. You know, when we can realize that, when we can develop such a wisdom, what happened the moment we realize it, any attachment, any aversion that arose from that belief in the I, not there anymore. Cannot arise anymore. Because the foundation, independence on which attachment and aversion arise, it's gone. And so then all the suffering that comes from attachment and aversion, gone. Right? If we would say that the way we believe in the I is correct, I would say we have no hope for any liberation. Liberation could not exist. But the fact that it is a wrong consciousness means that we can develop a mind that directly opposes that wrong consciousness. And with that can eliminate all the causes for our suffering. So that is the third type of reason that we can apply. And then another type of reason that we can apply is if the I was inherently the same as the body and the mind, then when the body dies, also the I dies. True? If it is the same thing, then when the body dies, also the I dies. When the I dies, if that is true, then memories from past lives would not be possible. Because there are no past lives. And if we listen to, you know, there are many, many children, especially in India, who have great recollection from past lives. And there are people who have investigated these stories from children about past lives and checked whether they were in accordance with reality or not. And they found many stories that are totally accurate. Where a little boy, he said he lived in another village, he was killed by someone, he could tell who his parents were, their names, where they were living, and so they go and check, and everything was there exactly as the boy had said. If the I would be inherently the same as the body and the mind, something like that is impossible. Right? So thinking like this helps you to loosen your grip onto your self-grasping mind, and starts to open up, you know. And the more we can let go of that self-grasping, the less attachment and anger will be generated in dependence upon that. So these are 4 reasonings that you can, there are more reasonings, but I'm not going to go into these details because you need more information to do that. But these are four very good reasons that you can apply yourself. You can think about it, think about it, think about it. And you start to realize how you believe that, oh, but I am that. And then you say, oh, no, I cannot be that. Right? So the second reasoning that we have to look in is that, so the first was, is if the I is inherently existent, it is either the same as the body and the mind, or the second is it is something different from the body and the mind. So you can have the feeling, well, you know, yeah, I have this body and mind, but it's not really who I am. I am actually something different, something totally different. So if the self would be something inherently different from the body and the mind, inherently means independent, inherently means therefore no relationship. So if the self would be inherently different from body and mind, there would be no relationship between the self and the body and the mind. So you couldn't say, this is my body, this is my mind, because that already assumes a relationship. You would not be able to say, I make that decision. I decide where I'm going to go, because there would be no relationship. Also, another fallacy about that is that if the self would be inherently different from the body and the mind, you should be able to think about self, about I, without having to think about the body and the mind. So at the moment when we think about self, what comes to mind is first our body and our mind, and then we call that the self. We cannot think about a self without calling to the mind the body and the mind. There is no other object that we can think about when we think about self. There is no other object that arises in the mind except our own body and mind. So if the self was something inherently different from the body and mind, you should be able to think about the self without having to think about the body and the mind. So while you keep thinking about that, you can say, okay, that means that the self is not inherently the same as the body and the mind. The self is not inherently different from the body and the mind. And if something were to exist inherently, it would have to be one of these two options. And it is neither. So therefore, the self does not exist inherently. This is not something that we can feel. This is not something that we can say, oh yeah, that resonates with me. We really have to think about it. Once we can have a little glimpse of that, that already starts influencing the deep emotional self-grasping that we do. You know, because the only way to counteract our emotions is that we see with reasoning, that's not true. That's not true. Oh my gosh, I believe that, but it's not true. The moment you see it's not true, whatever you believed in before is already losing its power. True? So there's a question that says, how can I regret negative actions in former life and having a feeling with it when I don't know what a negative action was? Yeah. So in general, we say, we have done all the negative actions that you can imagine in previous lives, right? We have also done all the good actions that you can imagine in previous lives. Because we have existence since beginningless time. We have taken rebirth numberless times. And so we must have engaged in all kinds of actions again and again and again. So how can you look at what can you relate to in this life? You know, one of the ways is that you look at the experiences that you have in this life and then think, that happened to me, that means I must have done that to others. You know? So whatever experience you have, you can use to reflect on what you must have done to others, and you purify that. And then the other one is that you think, what kind of habits do I have? You know, especially when I'm a little bit in trouble. What do I do? Do I lie? Do I steal? Do I take something that hasn't been given? Do I have the intention to suppress? Do I have the, what do I do? What is my habit? What do I do with little creatures? How careful am I? How do I treat human beings, animals? How do I do that? These are habits that we have. Habits come from having done this again and again and again. So then you can say, I must have done that in my past life. You know, in this life, I love fishing and I love killing the fish. That means I must have done it in past lives. Or the opposite. You know, we can also see the results of our practice when we look into our habits. When you have the habit to be very generous, you must have practiced this maybe many lifetimes. If you have the habit to have concern for others and not being straight away occupied with your own concern, you must have done some training in the past. Also, the good qualities are not coming from nowhere. So then you can start purifying with this, the actions that you relate to in this life. And then when you start doing that, my own experience is that you start seeing more and more, you know. In the beginning, I thought, oh, I'm a good person, you know. I never, ever would do that. But the deeper I look, the deeper I think, oh my gosh, you know, I must have done that. I must have done that. All right. I go to one more question. I always get a fear if something good happens to me and my family. I feel I should get away from people's bad eye, and I avoid to share my gut things with other people. How can I remove my fear? I'm not sure if I understand your question. I always get a fear if something good happens to me. You are afraid, you get afraid when good things happen to you because you think that maybe then jealous people come and take it away from you? Yes. So if you have experience with people who are jealous, you can first check like what is jealousy in my mind? Am I jealous for other people? And so you check and maybe you find jealousy, and if that's the case, then you start purifying your jealousy. And the opponent force of jealousy, the antidote to jealousy is rejoicing. Being happy for others when they have good fortune. Being happy for others when they receive something, even if you wanted to have it and you didn't get it. That you still say, but I'm happy for you that you have it. Sincerely from the heart. Then if you look into your mind and you say, I cannot find any jealousy, then you can say, okay, there must be maybe some karma that is ripening in this life that you meet with jealous people. And I mean, the only thing that I've heard from Lama Zopa Rinpoche, what is a very good antidote, is reciting the Golden Light Sutra. At the beginning of the sutra, it says that if you experience jealousy from other people, this Golden Light Sutra gives a lot of protection from that. You can download that from the FPMT website and recite it. And I recite it as often as I can because I do feel it gives a lot of protection from negative forces. And then maybe you can pray for your success, you know, and that your success might be without any disturbances or obstacles created by other forces. Okay? All right. So we have seen how the self does exist. And now we're going to look then how does this self exist, right? And so we say the self exists independence on causes and conditions. So the body exists independence on many causes and conditions, and similarly the mind exists independence on causes and conditions. When causes and conditions change, they affect our body and our mind. You know, and that is what is happening right now in the world. Conditions change, and we can see the effect on our body, we can see the effect on our mind. Right? When certain conditions arise, certain conditions, they make that the mind becomes more happy, more peaceful, more virtuous. And then there are certain conditions that make the mind very restless, fearful, harmful, you know, a lot of attachment. It depends upon causes and conditions. We have the predispositions to experience anything in the spectrum, from very good to very bad. Totally dependent upon causes and conditions. Then also the I, the self, exists in dependence on parts, on the parts. The I, but also everything else. So if I, for instance, have a table, the table is the whole. But I can only talk about the table when I have the parts of the table. A table without the parts of a table is not a table, right? And the same, when the parts are there, the whole also comes. They come together. So the whole depends upon the parts, and the parts depend upon the whole. And then the most subtle level of dependent arising is that whatever arises, whether that is a thing, whether that is a person, whether that is the I, depends upon name and conception. So I explain that whatever we perceive, you know, with our direct perception, which in actuality is impermanent, because the whole world, everything that arises is impermanent. It exists out of many, many, many parts. And it is, the way we perceive it is as if it is one thing that is permanent. And that thing exists within the object or within the person that we perceive. But in actuality, independence of what we perceive with our senses, there is an image generated in our mind. There is a name that we have learned from our mother, from our inner upbringing, and we project that onto the object. And in the next moment, that image is reflected back to us. And then we believe that that is what we are seeing. Right? But whatever we are seeing is actually coming from our own mind. It is a projection of our own mind. So if we want to lessen the self-grasping, what we can do is we can reflect on the emptiness of an inherently existent self, and we do that with the reasoning that we talked about. Or what you can do is, and then that means you're contemplating the ultimate nature of the reality of the self. Or what you can do is you can contemplate on the conventional nature of the self, which is that it is a dependent arising. And you think about all the causes and conditions needed for you to exist the way you exist, thinking about how you exist independent of all the parts that you're made of, and thinking about how the self exists independent of name and conception. And so whether you think about the lack of inherent existence, or whether you think about dependent arising, both will weaken your grasping to a self. The less we grasp, the less delusions will arise in dependence on that. So meditating on emptiness or meditating on dependent arising is extremely powerful, because we hit the deepest cause of all our problems right in the core. So even if you would do that every day, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, think about it. And you don't really have to sit down for it. You can walk around and you reflect on whatever you see. You know, what do I see? Where does that come from? Does it really exist like that? Then think about all the parts that the thing is made of, and that image that you receive that there is only one thing, you know, and how do you match them together? How do they go together? That weakens your conception of true existence, of inherent existence. Extremely powerful. Amos Opa calls it like an atom bomb, you know, destroying the root of all our suffering. So I'm going to wind this up. But the last thing, that where we also can transform our mind, you know, independence upon the self-grasping mind that holds onto a self to exist in a certain way, that in actuality that doesn't exist like that. What arises also is a kind of self-importance, which is called our self-cherishing mind. So that self-cherishing mind believes that my happiness is more important than your happiness. My suffering is much bigger than your suffering. You know, that self-cherishing mind is always about me. That self-cherishing mind is always taking care of me first, you know, and then maybe after some time, oh, there are also others. I also do something for others. So that self-cherishing mind, how we can transform that is we can transform it in a mind that cherishes others more than oneself. And so in Buddhism, when we apply these techniques, these are the techniques from the Mahayana mind training. These are very powerful techniques. But I think in order to generate these techniques, we would have to go more into detail in how we generate compassion, and then on the basis of that, we can do the mind training. So I thought about, instead of putting that in now, maybe at a later point in time, maybe in 3-4 weeks, I could do a little series of sessions on just Mahayana mind training, how to transform the self-cherishing mind into a mind that is cherishing others more than oneself. I don't know if you're interested in that, but I can put it on Facebook in a couple of weeks and see if people are interested in that. All right. Are there any questions? Thanks, Adi. Well explained. Are there meditations to remove jealousy, is a question. So I think you can make a meditation on jealousy, but I've never done it, but I will do that in the future. Jealousy is the combination of attachment and anger, right? So any meditation on lessening your attachment and anger will help the jealousy. Any meditation that you do on your self-grasping mind will lessen the jealousy. And then any thought that you have that is rejoicing in others' good fortune, that will help to lessen the jealousy. And sometimes I think jealousy is a very deep, deep emotion that is connected to, you know, not feeling good enough, not feeling worthy, not feeling complete, that something is missing, you know, and that indicates that there is attachment there. But you could look more into that aspect of you, you know, is it that I'm not feeling good enough? And then what can I do in order to feel good enough who I am? But that would be another course, you know. So if you feel like, you know, the rejoicing is the main one that we are given, but if you feel like that's not enough, I would say look into the general antidotes and then try to feel like, where is that jealousy coming from? Try to get more sense about what is really bothering you. It is a pain in you where jealousy is coming from. And then see if you can work with that. So whatever I'm going to do, I will do the same as whatever I'm going to do in a couple of weeks. I will do the same as now. I will just have the sessions open for anyone. You know, this is a special time on the planet, so I'm happy to share my knowledge with you if that is helpful for you. So I hope that the teachings have given you some understanding on the mind, and especially fear that arises in the mind, and how you can apply other ways of looking or engaging with your mind in order to counteract that. The recordings, if you feel like I want to have a little watch back to the recordings, you know, they're all on my YouTube channel, so you can have a look back. They will stay there, so even if later you think, oh, how was that? You know, you can go back. And there is a little description with each video what we are talking about. And so you don't have to see all of them. You can just go to what you need to see. Next weekend, I'll be teaching for Mahamudra Center in New Zealand. And also in 3 weeks, I'll teach a weekend, 2 hours a day. If you would like to participate in that, you can register on the Mahamudra website. Also, if you say, oh, but I'm living in Europe, I can't access the teachings when they're given, because I think it's for me, it's very early morning. For New Zealand time, it's 2 p.m. So for Europe, it's in the middle of the night. But if you register, you can get access to the videos that will be uploaded soon after. And if you're interested, you know, in the next few weeks, and he started today, Serkon Rinpoche is teaching at Instituto Lama Tsongkhapa, and you can register for free for these teachings. They are European time, somewhere in the afternoon, I think from 4 till 6, but I'm not sure. You check it out. You can register for free, and also you can watch the videos as long as the course is going. And I think he's teaching for almost 2 weeks. And if you want to know a little bit about emptiness, we spoke about that today a tiny bit. He's going to talk about that continuously. So if you feel that is appealing to your mind, have a look at their website and register, and you can join from tomorrow. And so on Tuesday, we have another meditation. And I will link that to the teachings that we did today. And then in the meantime, until we see each other for another teaching, I would say keep your heart soft. Don't believe everything you hear. Investigate whether the information you get is correct based on science. And stay connected with others. Stay connected and stay connected in a way that you care about others, you know, because in connection and in caring for others, we find our humanity. And it's very important that we stay connected to that. All right. Thank you so much for being here and for watching. And I hope to see you on Tuesday.